Welcome, listeners! You're about to embark on a fun and exciting journey brought to you by Teacher Jay. Get ready to dive into today's story, where learning meets imagination. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy this special audiobook presented by Teacher Jay. The Marshals and the Mighty Forgiveness lesson. In a small quirky town called Willowbrook lived the Marshals, a rather extraordinary family. Now, this wasn't just any ordinary family. They were full of joy, energy, and a strong apostolic faith that they practiced daily. Mr. and Mrs. Marshall had two lively children, Noah, who loved climbing trees, and Lucy, who had a talent for making people laugh. But as much as they loved each other, like all families, they had their little squabbles. One sunny afternoon, Noah and Lucy were playing outside when disaster struck. Noah, while building a fort with the branches he had carefully collected, saw Lucy rolling in his pile of leaves, completely destroying his work. With an angry shout, Noah ran over, his face red as a beet. "So, Lucy," he bellowed, "you ruined everything." Lucy, realizing her mistake, stood up sheepishly. "I didn't mean to, Noah. I was just playing." But Noah was furious. "I'm never playing with you again." And off he stormed, kicking up the dirt beneath him. Inside the house, Mrs. Marshall heard the commotion and called them both in for lemonade. As they sat at the table, Noah sulking and Lucy sniffling, Mrs. Marshall knew it was time for an important lesson. "Children," she began, her voice calm and warm, "do you know what Jesus teaches us about forgiveness?" Noah grumbled, still upset. "But she ruined my fort, Mom." Mrs. Marshall smiled softly. "Yes, I know you're angry, but Jesus teaches us that we must forgive each other, even when it's hard. Do you remember the story in the Bible where Peter asked Jesus how many times he should forgive someone?" Lucy perked up. "I think so. Peter asked if 7 times was enough, right?" Mrs. Marshall nodded. "That's right, Lucy. But do you remember what Jesus said?" Both children shook their heads. He said, "I say not unto thee, until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. That's from Matthew 18:22. Jesus wasn't just talking about numbers. He was showing us that we should always be ready to forgive, no matter how many times someone hurts us. "But it's so hard," Noah protested. "What if they do the same thing again?" Mrs. Marshall's eyes twinkled. "I know it's not always easy, Noah, but in Ephesians 4:32, the Bible says, 'Be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you.' You see, God forgives us every time we mess up, so we need to forgive others in the same way." Noah sighed, thinking about what his mom had said. "So, even if Lucy ruins my fort 100 times, I should forgive her?" Mrs. Marshall chuckled. "Exactly. Forgiveness isn't about keeping track of how many times someone wrongs you. It's about having a heart that lets go of anger and chooses love instead." "But what if I don't feel like forgiving?" Lucy asked quietly. Mrs. Marshall leaned forward, her voice gentle. "It's okay to feel upset at first, Lucy, but we can ask God to help us forgive. When we forgive, we free ourselves from anger and hurt. Remember what Jesus said when he was on the cross. 'Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.' Even though people hurt him terribly, he still forgave them." Noah and Lucy were quiet for a moment, thinking about Jesus forgiving even when he was hurt so badly. "So, what do you think, Noah?" Mrs. Marshall asked. Noah glanced over at Lucy, who was staring at the floor. He thought about his fort, his frustration, and how hard it was to stay mad. Then he thought about Jesus, who forgave people even when they were mean to him. Taking a deep breath, Noah slid his lemonade glass over to Lucy. "I forgive you, Lucy. Let's build a new fort together." Lucy's face lit up, and she hugged Noah tightly. Thanks, Noah. I'm really sorry." Mrs. Marshall beamed at them both. "That's the power of forgiveness," she said. "It brings us closer, just like God's forgiveness brings us closer to Him." As the children ran outside to rebuild their fort, Mr. Marshall walked in, having overheard the lesson from the other room. "You did well, my love," he said, wrapping his arm around Mrs. Marshall. She smiled, watching Noah and Lucy work together. "I think they're starting to understand that forgiveness is one of the strongest things we have." Shoot, Dan. And from that day on, whenever someone made a mistake in the Marshall house, and there were plenty of mistakes, they remembered that forgiveness wasn't just something they did once or twice. It was something they practiced every day, just like their faith. And just like building a strong fort, it made their family stronger than ever. So, the end. We hope you enjoyed this original story brought to you by Teacher Jay. Be sure to check out the channel page for more exciting titles and adventures. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.